True story, my daughter disrespected me, so I gave my entire estate to my nurse. Have you ever poured your entire being into a child, sacrificed your dreams, your very self, only to be discarded like an inconvenient relic the moment they found someone new? Have you ever watched the child you devoted your life to cast you aside for the person they married? Have you ever felt your heart break into a million pieces as your own flesh and blood stood by, silently, while you were torn down? I have. For years, I poured every ounce of my being, every penny I scrimped and saved, every hope and dream, into my son, Rowan. He was the sun, moon, and stars in my sky, especially after my beloved Arthur, his father, passed away too soon. Arthur and I had built a life together, a legacy of quiet love, deep respect, and unwavering support. We envisioned Rowan carrying that on, building his own family on those same bedrock principles. But then, he married Tamsin, and slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to fade from his eyes. It was like watching a vibrant painting lose its color, pixel by pixel, until all that remained was a cold, calculating indifference that stung more than any physical blow. Tamsin arrived like a whirlwind, all sharp edges disguised by an overly sweet facade. When Rowan first introduced her, she was charming, almost excessively so. Her laughter tinkled like wind chimes, a sound I initially mistook for genuine joy. Mother Alara, she'd coo, drawing out the syllables with an exaggerated sweetness that, even then, felt a little artificial. But Rowan was so utterly smitten, so clearly under her spell. I saw the way his eyes lit up, the way he'd absent-mindedly traced patterns on her hand, and I told myself that if she made him happy, truly happy, then I would embrace her with open arms. Oh, what a fool I was, blinded by a mother's desperate hope for her son's contentment. The subtle slights began almost immediately after their wedding, small paper cuts that, individually, seemed too trivial to mention, but collectively, bled me dry. She'd make comments about my quaint little house, always with that patronizing smile that never quite reached her eyes. Mother Alara, your furniture is just so vintage, isn't it? Like something out of a museum. She'd say it within earshot of her friends, forcing a polite, strained chuckle from me, a woman who had spent a lifetime curating treasures, not just collecting antiques. Then it escalated, from comments to actions. She started redecorating parts of my home when they came to visit, moving my beloved antique porcelain figurines and treasured family photographs, replacing my soft, floral curtains with her harsh, modern blinds. All without asking. She once even attempted to paint over the delicate hand-painted wallpaper in the guest bathroom, claiming it was dreadfully passé. When I gently protested, my voice barely a whisper, Rowan would interject, his own voice a little too loud, a little too quick, "Mom, it's just Tamsin trying to brighten things up. Don't be so resistant to change. You know how she loves her contemporary aesthetic." And I'd back down, desperate not to cause friction, desperate to cling to the illusion of a harmonious family. Each concession was a tiny erosion of my sovereignty, a piece of myself chipped away. Her financial jabs were, perhaps, the most cutting. Arthur and I had always lived modestly, preferring to invest wisely and live within our means. Our home, while large and filled with history, was comfortable, not ostentatious. It was a home, not a showpiece. But Tamsin, with her insatiable appetite for designer labels, exclusive memberships, and lavish vacations, couldn't fathom it. She believed wealth was meant to be flaunted, a weapon to wield in social circles, and she constantly pushed Rowan to demand more from me. "Mother Alara, you're sitting on a goldmine. Why are you so provincial with your money? You could be living like a queen. Or better yet, you could be funding our dreams. Think of the opportunities you're missing for us." She'd send Rowan to me with increasingly audacious requests for large sums, for a new luxury car that cost more than my first house, for a hefty down payment on a sprawling, soulless apartment in a high-rise, for her latest harebrained business venture, which seemed to change with the seasons. One month it was an organic smoothie bar, the next, a bespoke dog walking service for VIPs. Each time, I'd patiently explain that my investments were carefully managed for my long-term security and that of my grandchildren, that I had specific, cautious plans, much like Arthur had taught me. Each time, she'd twist my words, painting me as a stingy, old-fashioned woman who didn't understand modern economics. She's just afraid of progress, Rowan, I overheard her say once, after I refused to co-sign a ludicrous loan for her latest, and thankfully, failed, attempt at a high-end boutique. She's stuck in the past, poor dear. Doesn't understand how to make money work for her. She just hoards it like some miserly old dragon. I was often made to feel like a second-class citizen in my own family, in my own home. When they visited, I found myself waiting on them, fetching drinks, preparing elaborate meals while Tamsin scrolled through her phone, occasionally barking an order. Mother Alara, could you get me another glass of water? This one's gone warm, or Mom, do you mind clearing the table? We're just so exhausted from our busy day. It was as if I were their hired help, a silent, dutiful servant in the very house where I had raised my son and mourned my husband. The worst was when she'd openly critique my cooking, my clothes, my beloved gardening. Honestly, Mother Alara, those hydrangeas are so terribly out of style. And your roses, so common. You should really consider something more contemporary, something that screams luxury. She'd even comment on my choice of tea, my preference for classical music, every small comfort I found in my quiet life. And Rowan, that was the deepest cut, the wound that never truly healed. He started out trying to mediate, murmuring, Tamsin, that's a bit much, or Mom, she means well. But those murmurs grew fainter and fainter, until they disappeared altogether. He became Tamsin's puppet, her echo, her silent accomplice. He stopped defending me. When she humiliated me, he would simply look at his feet, or nervously clear his throat, or find an urgent reason to leave the room. I'd see the conflict in his eyes sometimes, a fleeting flicker of the boy who adored his mother, a shadow of guilt, but it was quickly extinguished by Tamsin's withering glare or a subtle, almost imperceptible tug on his arm. He chose her, every single time. He chose her comfort, her approval, her relentless demands, over his own mother's dignity, over the decades of love and sacrifice I had poured into him. One Christmas, a particularly painful memory, she actually packed away all my cherished antique ornaments, the delicate glass birds my grandmother had collected, the hand-painted wooden soldiers Arthur and I had bought on our honeymoon, and replaced them with garish, oversized modern baubles that looked like they belonged in a shopping mall. She claimed my old ones were depressing and dated. When I found them shoved haphazardly in a dusty box in the attic, my heart broke a little more. I didn't say anything. I just put them back in the attic and pretended not to notice the new ones. It was easier than the argument, easier than facing Rowan's averted gaze, easier than acknowledging the painful truth that they no longer cared about my feelings. I endured it all because of hope. Hope that Tamsin would mature, that Rowan would wake up, that our family could find some semblance of peace. I poured my remaining love into my grandchildren, trying to teach them the values of kindness, empathy, and respect, hoping they wouldn't inherit their mother's grasping, materialistic nature. I stayed quiet, I smiled, I bit my tongue, believing that my patience, my unwavering love, would eventually win them over. But all it did was make me invisible. It made me a doormat. It made me the old-fashioned mother-in-law they could openly mock and financially exploit. Little did they know, however, that while they were busy underestimating me, I was quietly holding the most powerful secret of all. My patience had a limit, and they were about to discover just how steep the price of pushing me past it could be. A few years prior, a quiet blessing had entered my life, Lysandra. After a minor fall left me needing a bit more assistance around the house, my doctor suggested a live-in nurse. Tamsin, of course, scoffed at the idea. Mother Alara, you don't need someone underfoot all the time. Just call us if you need anything, she'd said, knowing full well she'd never answer the phone. So, against her implied wishes, I hired Lysandra. She was a godsend. Quiet, efficient, but most importantly, kind. She treated me with genuine respect, not as a patient or a burden, but as a person. She listened when I spoke, truly listened. She brought me fresh flowers from the garden, not because they were expensive, but because she knew they made me smile. She cooked my favorite simple meals and laughed at my old jokes. She saw me, truly saw me, not as an obstacle or a means to an end, but as Alara. She had shown me more genuine warmth and care in the past year than my own family ever had in a decade. The day everything fractured beyond repair was my 72nd birthday. I had hoped for a quiet family dinner, maybe just a simple meal with Rowan and Tamsin, a chance for us to connect, if only for an hour. A sliver of the old intimacy, perhaps. But Tamsin, ever the architect of grand, self-serving gestures, had insisted on hosting a proper celebration. I knew what that meant, an elaborate show for her friends, an opportunity to flaunt her supposed social standing, and another chance for me to be an inconvenient prop in her carefully constructed world. The evening started with the usual thinly veiled disdain. Tamsin, resplendent in a shimmering gold dress that probably cost more than my entire year's grocery bill, fluttered around our dining room, a room she considered quaint and I considered home, her voice a brittle chime of false pleasantries. She'd invited a few of her friends, all of them younger, louder, and seemingly as self-absorbed as she was. Their laughter grated on my nerves, echoing too loudly in the high-ceilinged room. I sat at the head of the table, feeling like a museum exhibit, watching them sip their expensive wine and chatter about things I couldn't possibly understand, cryptocurrency, exotic vacations to places with unpronounceable names, designer handbags that were ugly but exclusive. Then, the conversation turned, inevitably, to money. Tamsin had recently approached Rowan, demanding I finance her latest investment opportunity, a dubious real estate venture in a developing country that sounded more like a pyramid scheme than a sound financial plan. Of course, I had politely but firmly refused. I may be old, but I am not foolish. My refusal had clearly rankled her. Mother Alara, she began, her voice dripping with mock concern, a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. We were just discussing the potential of certain investments. It's a shame you're so set in your ways when it comes to finances. So many opportunities missed, darling. All that money just sitting there, doing nothing, really. She waved a dismissive hand, a perfectly manicured gesture, as if my carefully managed portfolio, built over decades with my late husband, was nothing more than loose change under a sofa cushion. Her friends nodded in agreement, their eyes flicking to me with a mixture of pity and condescension, as if I were a particularly stubborn, albeit wealthy, child. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. This was her favorite tactic, publicly shaming me for my perceived lack of modern financial savvy, hoping to pressure me into caving. But tonight, it felt different. There was an edge to her voice, a raw, almost desperate frustration that promised something more, something uglier. Darling, with all due respect, she continued, leaning forward, her smile fixed but her eyes cold, calculating, it's honestly a bit of a burden. This house, for example. She gestured around my home, the home I had lived in for 50 years, where Rowan had taken his first steps, where Arthur and I had built a lifetime of memories, where every creak and groan of the old wood was a familiar, comforting sound. It's such an eyesore. All that dark wood, those antiquated fixtures. It's practically crumbling, isn't it? She tittered, a high-pitched, unpleasant sound, and her friends chuckled, covering their mouths with perfectly manicured hands, as if sharing a delightful secret. Honestly, Rowan and I talk about it all the time. The moment it's ours, we're tearing it down. Every last brick. Imagine a modern, open-plan space here. All glass and chrome, a real statement. A place truly fit for entertaining. My breath hitched. Tearing down my home? The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of that statement, spoken in my own dining room on my birthday. It wasn't just a threat, it was a violation, a declaration of war on my very existence, on every memory, every piece of my past. My hand trembled, but I kept my gaze steady, my face a mask of practiced composure. Tamsin, emboldened by her audience and my silence, pressed on, oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. And you know, the way you live, Mother Alara, it's just so small. All those little rituals, those worn-out clothes. It's almost as if you're trying to portray yourself as some kind of charity case. Honestly, Rowan and I keep telling you, you should hire a proper private nurse, someone professional, someone with a degree, not someone who looks like she just walked off a bus from wherever. She smirked, a cruel twist of her lips, glancing pointedly at Lysandra, my kind, dedicated live-in nurse, who was standing quietly near the kitchen entrance, having just brought out the birthday cake, adorned with its paltry few candles. Lysandra, who had shown me more genuine warmth and care in the past year than my own family ever had. The implication was clear: Lysandra was beneath them, beneath contempt, a symbol of my supposed destitution and poor judgment. That was it. The charity nurse comment. The public humiliation. The open declaration that my beloved home was an eyesore to be obliterated, its very foundation a target for their greedy ambitions. It wasn't just a slight, it was a complete erasure of my life, my values, my very identity. My carefully constructed patience, built over decades of minor indignities, shattered into a million irreparable pieces, like the glass birds from Christmas. I looked at Rowan. My son. The boy I had protected, nurtured, loved fiercely, the one for whom I had sacrificed so much. He was staring at his plate, his fork pushing around a piece of cake, a pathetic, cowardly gesture. He didn't meet my gaze. He didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. Not a single, solitary word. His silence was louder than Tamsin's cruelest taunt, a resounding affirmation of her power over him, and his utter abandonment of me. In that moment, the love I had held on to so desperately, the hope that he would eventually see, that he would remember, that he would choose me, it withered and died, a fragile flower crushed underfoot. A strange, chilling calm descended upon me. The tremor in my hand stilled. My vision sharpened, focusing not on the immediate pain, but on the path forward. I saw Tamsin, her preening smile, her eyes glinting with triumph. I saw Rowan, hunched and cowardly, a stranger. And I saw Lysandra, a flicker of hurt in her gentle eyes, but standing tall, radiating quiet dignity, a beacon of genuine humanity in a room filled with pretense. They had pushed me too far. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my generosity for foolishness, my quiet nature for senility. But they had no idea. Not the slightest clue. And in that very instant, a plan, long considered in the quiet hours of the night, a flicker of an idea born of desperation and humiliation, solidified into an unshakable resolve. The game was over. And I was finally ready to play my hand. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband, Arthur, left me. Arthur was a brilliant man, not just in business, but in understanding people. He saw things, even then, that I was too naive to grasp, too hopeful to acknowledge. He knew the world could be a cruel place, filled with opportunistic individuals, and he wanted to ensure I was always protected, no matter what. He had a quiet, meticulous way of doing things, planning for every eventuality, often without me even realizing the full scope of his foresight. He had often said, "Alara, my dearest, true strength lies not in boasting, but in having what others don't know you possess." Tamsin, in her boundless arrogance, always assumed Arthur had been as old-fashioned with his finances as she believed me to be. She thought his wealth was tied up in antiquated bonds or some obscure, inaccessible trusts that would eventually dwindle to nothing. She constantly whispered to Rowan that I was probably hiding money, or that I was too senile to manage it properly, and that they should somehow wrest control from me. She even tried to get me to sign over power of attorney once, claiming it was for my protection and to simplify things for the family, but my lawyer, a trusted friend of Arthur's, a man named Mr. Davies, quickly shut that down with a stern, no-nonsense letter. What Tamsin didn't know, what no one knew except for me and Arthur's trusted legal and financial team, was the true scale of what he had built and how meticulously I had managed it since his passing. Arthur, with his quiet genius, had structured our estate not just for immense growth, but also for my absolute, sole, and unchallengeable control. He had always been concerned about protecting me from any opportunistic individuals, a prescient worry indeed, given Tamsin's emergence. He had left me the deed to our large family home, free and clear, with specific clauses that made it impossible for anyone else to claim it without my express, written consent. More than that, he had established a substantial, carefully managed investment portfolio that, far from dwindling, had flourished under my disciplined oversight and the guidance of his seasoned financial advisors. Its true value was many, many multiples of what Tamsin, with her superficial understanding of wealth and her focus on fleeting designer trends, could ever have imagined. She saw me living modestly and assumed I was barely scraping by, or that I was simply too unsophisticated to manage significant assets. She thought I was a poor, doddering old woman clinging to the last vestiges of a bygone era. She saw a dusty old house and assumed it was falling apart, not realizing it was a well-maintained, historically significant property in a highly coveted area, appreciating year after year, a true jewel in the city's crown. This secret trump card wasn't a hidden vault of gold, it was simply my full and undeniable ownership of everything she coveted, meticulously secured by Arthur's foresight and my own quiet diligence. The decision to use it, to wield this power that had been patiently waiting in the shadows, wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful accumulation of moments, each one a tiny chip in my resolve, until finally, on my 72nd birthday, everything crumbled. The charity nurse comment, the belittling of Lysandra, was the final, unforgivable insult. But it was Rowan's silence, his averted gaze, that truly pushed me over the edge. In that moment, watching my son sit there, choosing his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity, I realized that my kindness, my patience, my love, had been utterly wasted on them. They saw it not as strength, but as weakness to be exploited. They saw me as a relic to be discarded, a barrier to their lavish fantasies. The very next morning, even before the sun had fully risen and washed the previous night's indignities away, I called Mr. Davies. My voice was steady, calm, devoid of the tremor that usually accompanied my conversations with Tamsin. I want to initiate the asset transfer, I told him, not bothering with pleasantries. Everything. The house, the investments. To Lysandra. He was surprised, of course. A long pause followed my statement. Mrs. Alara, he said, his voice cautious, are you absolutely certain? This is a significant decision. Perhaps we should discuss it further, explore other options? Never been more certain, Mr. Davies, I replied, my gaze fixed on the quiet, rising sun outside my window, a symbol of a new beginning. Arthur made sure I had this power, and now I intend to use it. For the right person. He built it to protect me, and now I use it to protect what little genuine goodness remains in my life. I spent the next few weeks meticulously ensuring every legal detail was ironed out. Mr. Davies, a man of impeccable integrity, handled everything with swift efficiency and absolute discretion. Lysandra, bless her heart, was utterly bewildered when I first approached her, a week after my birthday. I'd called her into the living room, a place she usually only entered to clean or bring me tea. Lysandra, I began, holding out a sheaf of papers, the deed to the house, this is for you. Her eyes, usually so bright and observant, were wide with disbelief. Me, Mrs. Alara? But why? What is this, she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because, Lysandra, I had explained, taking her hand, a gesture she accepted hesitantly at first, you have shown me more respect, more kindness, more genuine care in the past year than my own family has in a decade. You see me, truly see me, not as an obstacle or a means to an end. You treat me with dignity. You deserve this. You've earned it, my dear. She had tried to refuse, out of humility, her eyes welling with tears. But Mrs. Alara, I am your nurse, it is my duty, but I was firm. Arthur had prepared for this, for every contingency. The legal framework was robust. The transfers were made, quietly, discreetly, over the following weeks, each signature another nail in the coffin of Rowan and Tamsin's expectations. The house deed was now in Lysandra's name. The investment portfolio, too. I made sure of it. All legally binding, irreversible. Rowan and Tamsin, oblivious in their self-importance, continued their lives of credit-fueled luxury, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. They didn't know that the old-fashioned woman they mocked had meticulously orchestrated their downfall. They thought I was a fool. But soon, very soon, they would discover the true cost of their contempt. The day of reckoning was approaching, and I was ready. And then, the day came. Not a specific date on a calendar marked for revelation, but a natural progression of events that led to the inevitable, explosive moment. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon, about a month after my 72nd birthday. The air was heavy, humid, promising a summer storm. Tamsin and Rowan had dropped by unannounced, as they often did, treating my home like a glorified hotel lobby where they could wait out traffic or use my facilities. Tamsin was, as usual, full of herself, recounting some minor social triumph about a charity gala she'd attended, while Rowan nodded along, occasionally interjecting a forced, hollow laugh. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, ostensibly reading a worn copy of Jane Austen, but in truth, watching them with a quiet, almost detached amusement. A sense of serene anticipation had settled over me. Lysandra was in the kitchen, preparing tea, humming softly a tune I didn't recognize, but which somehow soothed my spirit. The contrast between her gentle, unassuming presence and Tamsin's abrasive, self-important energy was stark, almost comical. Tamsin, in mid-anecdote about a new designer bag she simply had to have and how it would complete her curated spring collection, suddenly frowned. She paused, her gaze sweeping around the living room, a familiar look of distaste on her face. Honestly, Mother Alara, she interrupted herself, her voice sharp, this house just gives me the creeps sometimes. It's so stuffy. All that dark wood, those heavy curtains, it's positively oppressive. I really can't wait until we can finally make some proper changes. She eyed a beautiful antique grandfather clock, a family heirloom that had chimed the hours of 3 generations, with undisguised disdain. That thing needs to go first. It's absolutely hideous. Takes up too much space. We could put a modern art piece there, something vibrant. Rowan, bless his cotton socks, actually flinched. He looked at me, a fleeting moment of discomfort in his eyes, a ghost of the son I once knew, before quickly averting his gaze, back to the safe confines of his mobile phone. The usual dance. The familiar cowardice. But this time I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I simply closed my book, the soft thud of the cover against the pages echoing loudly in the suddenly quiet room. I placed it carefully on the side table, my movements deliberate, unhurried. Then, I looked directly at Tamsin. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, clear, and steady. Every word articulated, every syllable ringing with quiet authority, like the toll of a distant, inevitable bell. Tamsin, I began, and her chatter died, a surprised squawk caught in her throat. She looked at me, taken aback by my sudden, direct address, by the uncharacteristic firmness in my tone. You're quite right. This house, it is rather stuffy for your tastes, isn't it? A smirk played on her lips, a glimmer of triumph. She thought I was finally conceding, finally giving in to her relentless pressure. Well, darling, you must admit. And it's quite true, I continued, cutting her off smoothly, my voice unwavering, that you've often expressed your desire to tear it down and replace it with something modern and grand. You mentioned that at my birthday dinner, if you recall. And your plans for the grandfather clock. Her smirk wavered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty. Rowan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally looking up from his phone, his eyes darting between his wife and me. They could sense a shift in the air, a subtle tension they hadn't anticipated, a storm gathering on the horizon. Well, yes, Tamsin said, recovering quickly, her voice regaining its brittle confidence, I mean, it's only natural for us to want to update our future inheritance, isn't it? To make it truly ours, a place we can be proud of. She laughed, a brittle, forced sound that rang hollow in the room. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze unwavering, holding hers captive. That's where you've made a rather significant miscalculation, Tamsin. She frowned, confusion clouding her face, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. What do you mean, Mother Alara? You see, I explained, my voice still perfectly level, almost serene, you've made a great many assumptions about my future inheritance. You've assumed it was yours for the taking. You've assumed that my quiet nature meant I was foolish, or that my patience meant I was weak. And you've assumed that your relentless disrespect and your cruelty towards me, and indeed towards Lysandra, would have no consequences. Rowan was now staring at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly agape. He could feel it too, the tremor of something monumental, something irrevocable. The air crackled with unspoken truths. I have, in fact, been rather busy these past few weeks, I continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. Following your insightful comments at my birthday dinner, particularly your concern for my charity nurse and the eyesore that is my home. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching Tamsin's face drain of color, a dawning horror creeping into her eyes, distorting her features. Her breath hitched. I have transferred all of my assets, Tamsin. Every single penny. The entire investment portfolio, which, I assure you, is far more substantial than you ever imagined. And yes, I looked directly at her, letting the words sink in, the deed to this very house, the one you so desperately wished to tear down. Tamsin's jaw dropped. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air, her painted lips unable to form words. What are you saying?" she stammered, her voice thin and reedy, a shadow of its usual commanding tone. "I am saying," I enunciated clearly, each word a hammer blow, "that this house, the land it sits on, and all of my financial wealth, no longer belong to me. They belong to Lysandra." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. Rowan shot up from his seat, his face ashen, a mixture of disbelief and dawning panic. "Mom? What are you talking about? You can't be serious. You can't do this." I turned to him, my gaze softening slightly, but remaining firm, resolute. "Oh, but I am, Rowan. Every legal document signed, sealed, and delivered. It's all final. Irreversible. Lysandra is now the sole owner of everything. Your father, Arthur, ensured I had this power, and I have used it." Tamsin let out a small, strangled scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. "You did what? You gave everything to that nurse? Are you insane? That's our inheritance. Rowan, tell her. Tell her she can't do this." She lunged towards me, her face contorted with fury, her hands outstretched as if to physically shake the truth out of me. Before she could reach me, Lysandra, who had silently entered the living room during my explanation, her presence as quiet and steady as ever, stepped forward. She placed a gentle but firm hand on Tamsin's arm, stopping her in her tracks. Her presence, calm and steady, was a stark contrast to Tamsin's frantic panic, an island of serenity in a raging storm. "The documents are all in order, Mrs. Tamsin," Lysandra said, her voice quiet but resolute, carrying an unexpected weight of authority. "I'm afraid Mrs. Alara is quite serious. I am the legal owner of this property and all associated assets." Tamsin recoiled as if burned, turning to Lysandra with a look of pure, venomous hatred. "You scheming, gold digger. You manipulated her. You tricked a senile old woman. This is fraud." Lysandra met her gaze evenly, her gentle eyes now holding a steely resolve. "I have done nothing but care for Mrs. Alara with respect and kindness, something she has rarely received from her own family. And I assure you, Mrs. Alara is as sharp and clear-minded as anyone I know." This was entirely her decision. Rowan, meanwhile, was speechless, frozen in the middle of the room. A mix of shock, betrayal, and a deep, agonizing regret washed over his face, stripping away the layers of indifference he had worn for so long. He looked at me, then at Lysandra, then around the familiar room that was no longer ours, no longer his. His dream, Tamsin's dream, their grand future built on my assumed demise, had just imploded before his very eyes. The full weight of his years of silence, of his complicity in Tamsin's cruelty, seemed to crush him, bending his shoulders under an invisible burden. He finally understood the magnitude of what he had allowed to happen, what he had lost. Tamsin, now breathing heavily, her chest heaving, looked around the house she had planned to demolish, the realization dawning on her that she and Rowan were now essentially living in Lysandra's property, completely dependent on the goodwill of the very person she had so cruelly mocked as a charity nurse. The power had shifted, irrevocably, and the look of utter, profound despair on her face was a sight I would never forget. So, where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Well, her grand plans for a modern mansion in the heart of the city, built on the ashes of my eyesore home, crumbled into a pile of expensive dust. The shock of my announcement left Tamsin in a state of utter hysteria. She screamed, she raged, she threatened legal action, but Mr. Davies, steadfast and loyal as Arthur himself, simply presented her with the meticulously prepared, legally ironclad documents. Every asset, every penny, every brick of that house, was irrevocably Lysandra's. There was no loophole, no recourse. Tamsin, who had always lived far beyond her means, relying solely on Rowan's modest salary and her imagined inheritance, found herself facing a terrifying reality. Her credit cards, once a bottomless well of luxury, were maxed out, accumulating crippling interest. Her lavish lifestyle, built on the assumption that she would soon come into a vast fortune, evaporated overnight. The truth of her financial recklessness, hidden beneath layers of designer clothes and extravagant dinners, was laid bare for all to see. There were no more funds for her dubious real estate ventures, no more money for her endless stream of expensive whims. She had no real career to fall back on, having always considered herself too high-minded and talented for a regular job. Her carefully curated circle of superficial friends, who had only ever cared about her connections and her perceived wealth, quickly abandoned her once it became clear her financial wellspring had dried up. She was no longer the hostess with the mostest, but a woman drowning in debt, stripped of her perceived status, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. And Rowan? My son, he was utterly devastated. Not, I believe, initially for me, but for what he had lost. The life he had grown accustomed to, the easy path of relying on his mother's wealth, was gone. He saw Tamsin's frantic desperation and, for the first time, perhaps truly understood the monster he had helped create, the monster that was now turning on him. He was caught between his wife's furious recriminations and the stark reality of his mother's decisive action. He tried to plead with me, with Lysandra, begging for a chance to make things right, his voice hoarse with a mixture of shame and panic. But the bridge had been burned, brick by painful brick, by his own silence, by his complicity. There was nothing left to salvage. Lysandra, bless her gentle heart, truly shone in the aftermath. She did not gloat, not once. Instead, with a quiet dignity that put Tamsin's histrionics to shame, she offered Tamsin and Rowan a lease agreement, a fair market rent for the very home they had planned to tear down. It was a gracious, almost impossibly kind gesture, a testament to her character, but it forced them to confront their new reality. They were tenants in what they once considered their birthright. The irony was palpable. Tamsin, who had mocked Lysandra as a charity nurse and someone from wherever, was now living under the roof of the woman she had so cruelly dismissed, dependent on her goodwill to have a place to live. Lysandra even offered Rowan a job managing some of the newly acquired properties, a way for him to earn an honest living and potentially rebuild his life, but under her authority. It was a bitter pill for them to swallow, especially for Tamsin, who raged against it, but they had no choice. They signed. Their downfall was slow, painful, and very public within their social circles. Tamsin was forced to sell off her designer handbags and jewelry, piece by humiliating piece, to pay off debts, her curated collections sacrificed to stave off bankruptcy. Rowan, stripped of his easy life, had to truly work, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, to support his family. Their grand dreams of luxury were replaced by the harsh realities of budgeting and responsibility. I heard whispers that Tamsin blamed him for everything, for not being able to manipulate me better, for not being man enough to demand their inheritance. Their marriage, built on a foundation of entitlement and greed, became strained, teetering on the brink, finally cracking under the weight of financial burden and mutual recrimination. As for me, my newfound peace is immeasurable. I continue to live in my beloved home, though now it is Lysandra's, and she, in her unwavering kindness, insists I stay as long as I wish, free of charge. She cares for me not out of duty, but out of genuine affection and respect. We share quiet evenings, discussing books, gardening, and the simple joys of life. She brings me tea without being asked, just the way I like it. The constant weight of Tamsin's demands and Rowan's silent disappointment has been lifted. I finally feel free, truly free, for the first time in years. The house, once a battleground of my patience, is now a sanctuary of peace. The lesson they learned, the hard way, was this: true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds alone, but in respect, kindness, and genuine human connection. Entitlement, left unchecked, leads to ruin. And never, ever, test anyone's patience to its limits. Because the quietest people often hold the biggest secrets, and the greatest power, waiting for the perfect moment to write the final, unforgettable chapter. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to be cast aside? Or perhaps you've seen a child choose their spouse's demands over their own parents' dignity? My channel is filled with stories just like mine, tales of life lessons learned the hard way, and the unexpected ways we find strength when pushed to our limits. If my story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next video. And I truly want to hear from you. Share your own troubles, your thoughts, your experiences in the comments below. Let's create a community where our voices are heard, and our experiences can offer solace and strength to others.